Number 6. Stella Paris. In 2012, exotic dancer Stella Paris, originally from England, met a man by the name of Andrew Lamb at a gentleman's club in Malta. By her own subsequent admission, Paris, who was then 26-year-old, hadn't initially liked Lamb and was more attracted to his wealth. Paris claims she eventually found him charming, recalling one interaction in which she'd given him a dance and Lamb lifted her up repeatedly, exclaiming, "You're going to be mine." They went on to have a relationship for about a year and lived a life of luxury on the island nation. Paris noted that Lamb frequently suffered from nightmares, and his behavior towards her gradually became more aggressive and controlling. In one incident, he'd lashed out because he didn't like the breakfast she'd cooked him and threw the meal at her. Paris told him that she was leaving him, at which point he reportedly pinned her to the floor, injuring her wrist. The relationship eventually ended, and Paris returned to London in 2013 for a fresh start. 6 years later, she suffered a panic attack upon finding out the truth about the man she'd known as Andrew Lamb. His real name was Christopher Guest Moore, and at the time of their relationship, he was one of Europe's most wanted men. He was part of a gang who, on June the 19th of 2003, had brutally tortured and murdered a man at a farm near Knutsford in Cheshire, England. The victim, 44-year-old Brian Waters, was a cannabis grower who'd amassed a massive drug debt to an underworld figure. Moore and 3 accomplices ambushed him in his home. They suspended him upside down, beat him with a metal bar, and attacked him with an industrial staple gun during a 3-hour onslaught. Waters died from the wounds sustained in the attack, which also resulted in another person who was helping at the farm being seriously injured. Moore was on the run for roughly 16 years before he was arrested and brought to England, where he was consequently sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 24 years served. Number 5. Elizabeth Klopfer. Serial killer Ted Bundy was once described by a member of his own legal team as the very definition of heartless evil. Days before his 1989 death by electrocution, Bundy confessed to killing 30 women in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. Between 1973 and 1978, he relied on his charisma to lure his victims, whom he assaulted and killed, often in gruesome fashion. In some cases, Bundy abused their dead bodies and kept their severed heads as trophies. Investigators believed that he'd claimed many more victims than the ones he'd admitted to or had been convicted of. In the fall of 1969, he met 24-year-old Elizabeth Klopfer in the Sandpiper Tavern in Seattle. She'd recently moved to the city with her 3-year-old daughter, Molly, following her divorce. Their relationship lasted for 6 years into the 1970s, when Bundy committed some of his most horrific killings. He helped raise Molly, who later on, as an adult, wrote about multiple instances in which Bundy had been abusive or had had inappropriate contact with her. Nevertheless, the illusion of relationship bliss prevailed, and Elizabeth fully trusted Ted to take care of her and her child. They went to the courthouse to get a marriage license in 1970, but Bundy ripped it up following a fight a few days later. The relationship continued, as did Bundy's killing spree, which at one point involved him burning a victim's head in Klopfer's fireplace. She later noted that he would sometimes be emotionally and verbally abusive towards her, recalling an incident when she'd confronted him about his habit of stealing and Bundy threatened to break her neck. Then in 1974, Klopfer saw a composite sketch in the newspaper of a man suspected in a string of murders and kidnappings. He looked like her boyfriend, was also identified as Ted, and drove a car similar to his. In August, Klopfer called the police in Seattle and 2 months later contacted the authorities in Utah, where Bundy had become active. She was dismissed on both occasions, even though she'd initially suspected Bundy of being a serial killer. And even after his 1976 arrest in Utah, Klopfer still believed him when he claimed he was innocent. They exchanged letters. She visited him in prison, and she sat by his parents in March of 1976 when he was on trial for the attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRonch. As more murders and kidnappings were tied to Bundy, Klopfer began to distance herself from him. In her memoir, The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy, which Kloepfer later wrote under a pseudonym, she claimed to have had a phone conversation with Bundy in 1978 while he was imprisoned in Florida. She asked if he'd ever tried to kill her. He admitted that the urge to do so had taken a hold of him one night. Bundy revealed that he'd closed the fireplace damper so the smoke couldn't go up the chimney, and then he left after putting a towel under the door. In hindsight, Kloepfer remembered waking up coughing and unable to breathe after a night of drinking, but was able to open the windows in timely fashion. Number 4. Judith Ridgway. One of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the US, Gary Ridgway, was suspected of having murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Ridgway mostly preyed on escorts and runaways, whom he picked up along Pacific Highway South, near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. He'd have relations with the women and then fatally strangle them. Prior to being identified, he was known as the Green River Killer, as several of his victims had been found dumped in wooded areas around the river. Incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy collaborated with law enforcement in their investigation, correctly suggesting that Ridgway was returning to grave sites to abuse his victims' bodies. According to the women in his life, Ridgway had an insatiable appetite, demanded intercourse multiple times a day. His first 2 marriages resulted in divorce in 1972 and 1981, respectively, because of infidelity on behalf of both partners. Ridgway claimed his first confirmed victim in 1982, and most of the others in the 2 years that followed. He began dating Judith Mawson in 1985. The woman noticed that there was no carpet on his floor when she moved into his home. She would eventually learn, years later, that it was likely because Ridgway had used it to dispose of a body. They got married in 1988, and in November of 2001, Ridgway was arrested after samples of his DNA were conclusively linked to genetic material found in 4 of his earlier victims. Judith stood by her husband, who adamantly denied being the Green River Killer and ardently maintained his innocence. She believed him and frequently visited him in jail, later reporting, "We would try to touch each other through the glass." Within 2 years of his arrest, to avoid the death penalty, Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Judith severed all ties with him in the aftermath, and they were later divorced. Ridgway was interviewed in prison by author Penny Moorhead and claimed that he truly loved Judith, which led to a considerable drop in his killing frequency. Only 3 of the 49 murders of which he was convicted had occurred after he'd married her. Judith was subsequently quoted as telling a local reporter, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." During an interview with People in 2011, she revealed that she hadn't dated anyone since divorcing Ridgway, as her ability to trust men had been all but shattered. Number 3. Holly Udy. In late August of 2016, Carla Brown and her boyfriend, Charles David Carver, both in their 30s at the time, disappeared after they'd gone to remove brush from a property in Woodruff, South Carolina. Unusual social media activity on the latter's social media led the authorities to conclude that someone else had taken control of his Facebook account. The police tracked the couple's last known cell phone signals and reached a large metal container on a property of roughly 95 acres owned by Todd Kohlhepp. Officers heard banging from the container and inside found 30-year-old Brown chained at the neck. Footage of her rescue was picked up by media outlets around the world. The woman had been held captive by Kohlhepp for 65 days, a period during which he'd abused her multiple times on a daily basis. Kohlhepp had gunned down Carver in front of her and further deterred Brown from escaping by showing her the bodies of other victims on his property. They were later identified as married couple Johnny Joe Coxey and Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, residents of Spartanburg, who'd been missing since December the 22nd of 2015. The latter had been shot in the head roughly a week after her husband had been killed. They'd initially been hired by Kohlhepp to work on his property. He was also linked to and ultimately convicted of a 2003 mass shooting in which 4 workers were killed at a motorcycle shop in Chesney. Following a plea bargain in 2017, Kohlhepp was spared capital punishment and given 7 consecutive life sentences. He wrote to the Spartanburg Herald-Journal that same year, claiming he had killed more people who hadn't been discovered. For 10 years, the convicted serial killer had been having an affair with a married woman named Holly Udy. She'd reportedly met him in 2006 when he'd already killed 4 innocent people, thinking he was just a clean-cut real estate broker. Once his murders were uncovered, Udy gave an interview for Inside Edition. She claimed to have known Kohlhepp as an attentive man who made her feel like she was important, but also noted having felt that there was something off about him. Udy revealed that she'd actually loaned Kohlhepp the money to buy the metal container where Brown was found, after he'd claimed to need it for supplies. She told Inside Edition that she'd felt sickened and disgusted upon learning of Kohlhepp's crimes, as well as the fact that she would have likely been his next victim. As she was being transported to a hospital, Brown, the serial killer's only known survivor, was filmed saying, "Some girl named Holly he's supposedly planning to kill." Number 2. Barbara Kuklinski. In 1961, Barbara met her future husband, Richard Kuklinski, at a trucking company in New Jersey where she worked as a secretary. They started dating, and Barbara soon came to realize that Richard had unpredictable Jekyll and Hyde-like personality shifts. Although often caring and affectionate, he would irregularly become intensely violent towards her. In one incident, he stabbed her in the back with a hunting knife when she tried to break up with him. Barbara was only 19 when they started dating and reportedly felt like she could change Richard. The couple eventually got married, and they went on to have 3 children together. In spite of his aggressive mood shifts to his family, neighbors, and community, Richard was a successful businessman, working as a wholesale distributor. Barbara had experienced his dark side firsthand, but was completely unaware of how far beyond the household his violence extended. For years, under the facade of New Jersey suburban normalcy, Richard lived a second life as a burglary gang leader, serial killer, and mafia hitman. He'd first killed in his early teens when he beat a childhood bully to death in Jersey City. In his early 20s, he was reportedly contracted by the mafia and, by his own account, carried out hits for all 5 families, with the Gambino family being his earliest employer. Richard came to be nicknamed Iceman by law enforcement because he'd purposefully freeze his victims in an attempt to disguise their time of death. Standing at 6 feet and 5 inches tall while weighing close to 300 pounds, Richard was an intimidating presence, and his murderous methods varied from manual strangulation and bludgeoning to using blades, ice picks, explosives, firearms, or poison. He was arrested on December the 17th of 1986, following an undercover investigation lasting 18 months. The Iceman was definitively linked to 5 killings for which he was given 5 consecutive life sentences. In subsequent interviews, which formed the basis of 3 HBO documentaries, Richard claimed to have killed well over 100 people, although some of his contract hits and affiliations have been disputed. When his crimes came to light, Barbara compared the reveal to being struck by a lightning bolt. She told a media outlet, "I was married to a monster, and I didn't know it." She and Richard got divorced in 1993, and he died in prison in 2006 at the age of 70. Number 1. Paula Rader. Kansas woman Paula Dietz married a man by the name of Dennis Rader, a United States Air Force veteran, on May the 22nd of 1971. Within months of meeting him, they moved to Park City, a suburb of Wichita, and built a life together. Paula never suspected that Dennis long harbored twisted fantasies that involved binding helpless victims and tormenting them for personal gratification. On January the 15th of 1974, within less than 2 months of the birth of his son, Dennis acted out on his dark impulses. He broke into the Otero household in Wichita, killing 4 family members in gruesome fashion in the years that followed. Dennis claimed 6 more victims and engaged in taunting communication with the media and law enforcement, mocking and revealing details about his killings. In one of his letters, he proposed several nicknames for himself, including the one that eventually remained, BTK, short for Bind, Torture, Kill. Wichita officials announced they were dealing with a serial killer after Dennis's second letter, and his notoriety as BTK grew. At home, however, he was a church president, caring husband, and loving father of 2. His daughter was born in 1978. In March and December of the previous year, Dennis had killed 2 women, Shirley Vianne Relford and Nancy Fox. Ironically, Dennis's day job from 1974 to 1988 involved installing security systems in many cases for people concerned over BTK. At one point, Paula found a disturbing poem he'd written and entitled Shirley Locks, a line of which read, "Thou shalt not scream, but lay on cushion and think of me and death." Dennis was taking college classes at the time and simply dismissed it as a creative writing assignment. Paula thought nothing more of it, but did notice spelling was just as bad as the one found in BTK's publicized notes. By 2004, Dennis had effectively gotten away with 10 murders, having claimed his last victim in 1991. He then decided to resume communication with the media and law enforcement, leaving behind evidence which directly led to his arrest in February of 2005. In the immediate aftermath, Paula reportedly told the police that he was a good man who would never hurt anyone. She ultimately cut off all contact with him when he pleaded guilty to 10 murders in June of 2005. Within a month, she was granted an emergency divorce. Paula was left suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after unknowingly being in a 34 years long relationship with one of the US's most terrifying serial killers. Thanks for watching. Would you rather find out that your significant other was a serial killer or that they were cheating on you with one of your family members? Let us know in the comments section below.